Morning, everybody. I'm Mark Imbriaco. I'm the founder of a company called Operable. We are focused on helping the humans who have to work on our systems. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So my background, I've been doing this whole internet operations and development stuff for about 20 years now. I've been really fortunate and had a chance to work at some interesting companies. You can read about it here. But I'm an ops nerd. And that's the way I identify, right? I think about myself as an ops guy, because that's what I've done for the vast majority of my career. And I've spent the last probably 10 years or so thinking about what makes ops teams work well. And I think there's an interesting story here that we can talk about around the human part of our systems. So let's set the stage a little bit. Adaptability. I'm going to talk a lot about this idea of adaptability. And in systems, in the startup world, we hear a lot about this idea of unfair advantages, right? What's your unfair advantage? Why are you going to have an advantage over your competition? The same thing applies to systems of all sorts, right? This idea of adaptability, the ability to react to changing conditions, the ability to respond to unexpected events, the ability to take advantage of opportunities. This idea of adaptability is an incredibly powerful advantage in all of our systems, from a business point of view, from a technical point of view, and also from a human point of view. But we don't think a lot about the human part of that adaptability enough. And this adaptability idea is important because the rate of change in all of our systems, and our businesses even, is doing nothing but accelerate. If you think about if you've been in this industry for 10 years or more, think about what it was like 10 years ago. Think about the pace of application deployment. Think about the business world. Think about all the businesses that have been disrupted. Mark Andreessen's famous "software's eating the world" quote is tired but also true. This idea that companies that are able to adapt, that are able to iterate quickly, that are able to take advantage of opportunities, and largely through software, have a tremendous advantage over companies that aren't. And the reason why they do that is because they're adaptable, right? These companies that embrace software, that embrace iteration, that embrace this forward progress, use this concept of adaptability to their advantage. And this adaptability has meant that the pace of change has increased tremendously. The number of apps that are deployed all the time have gone through the roof, right? Think about the number of applications that are in an average company today compared to 10 years ago. And think of all the enabling tools and technology and process that have come along to support that, right? We've got frameworks like Ruby on Rails that came along in the mid-2000s that had a tremendous impact on the speed at which we could deploy web apps. A lot of those same ideas are in other systems today. Think about practices, right? Agile came along, and from a process point of view, software development moved from this waterfall world where we designed everything up front and could never meet schedules, could never deliver on time, to this more iterative world where we deliver just enough to get by and we iterate on it and improve. And the combination of all of these things means that we deploy applications at a rate that seems mind-boggling to anybody that's been in the industry for a while. So how do we cope with this, right? We come up with ideas on the ops side that sort of mirror the dev side, right? We take these ideas from Agile and we create this thing called DevOps. It's focused on collaboration and feedback loops and communication. At least that's where it started. But the reality today, I think, and this is kind of a pithy quote, but I also think it's true. I think DevOps is more of a coping mechanism today than it is a cultural movement that's focused on collaboration. And I think that's unfortunate because there's a tremendous amount of value in the human interactions that we have with our teammates. But the reality is, the way that DevOps generally gets implemented, it may as well just be a synonym for continuous delivery. Because the part that we focus on, the part that companies tend to fixate on, is the part of DevOps that gets code from my developer's laptop to production. And then we stop thinking about it. The problem's solved now, right? We delivered this code, we've got value, but now what, right? Now we've got, generally speaking, the same ops structures that couldn't support this growth of applications before, that couldn't even manage to get applications from laptops to production in a reasonable time. Now they have even more work to do because they have 10 times as many applications in the field. And we don't spend enough time thinking about that. I think it was Adrian's talk where he just said that When we have operations problems, we throw more ops people at their problem. When developers have those same problems get woken up, we throw automation at it. I think that's true, and it's super interesting. I think it's becoming less true, but I still think it's true. And it's becoming less true because our operations people are becoming more developers, right? We have more developers doing work. We have more operations people that are being hired who have a development background or know how to write code. In fact, I'd be hard-pressed to hire someone in an operations role that couldn't write code at this point. I don't think I would do it. So we automate, right? We automate because we have to. We automate because we have no choice. We automate because the rate of change means that we can't log into every system anymore. We can't hand-build systems. We can't respond to the demands that we have if we don't automate. Even at very small scales, automation is necessary because we need this repeatable process. We need to be able to iterate quickly. We need to be able to redeploy code, multiple times a week or a day or an hour, depending on our situation. So we add automation. We write lots of tools. People that do ops work and development work tend to love tools. We fixate on tools all the time. We fixate on text editors. We fixate on programming languages and frameworks. And we write lots and lots of tools and shell scripts and chef cookbooks and Puppet modules and all of the above, right? So we've got all this automation, and automation is great. And you hear this idea a lot that automation and that automation can take the place of ops teams, right? That this idea of no ops, this idea that if we just add enough automation, we can sleep through the night and we'll never have problems. And we've got all this automation, and increasingly, we have automation to do things like respond to incidents, respond to problems. And automation is great for a category of those kinds of problems. It's great for solving predictable, repetitive tasks. And the predictable thing is the key word there, I think. We've got people who think they can solve these sorts of problems with machine learning that in non-predictable situations. I still have not been convinced. I think it's going to take quite a while for me to be convinced. And I think that's going to be the case with people who have operations roles in general, right? Because the reality is no matter how good your tool is at sort of predictive analytics or predictive troubleshooting, it only has to be wrong once before you don't trust it anymore. So the barrier is very, very high. But given these tools that we have, given these automated remediation tools, given the fact that I don't have to wake up at 3 a.m. to rotate logs anymore, given all this automation, given the rise of platforms like Cloud Foundry and Heroku and others, and Google App Engine, what is the role of the humans in the system? We've got these tools that can respond to these routine events, that can fix our systems when they fail. Why do we need people? So plot twist. Have you ever noticed that no-ops has oops right in the name? The reality is, and this quote from DevOps Borat's one of my favorites, to make error is human, to propagate error to all server in automatic way is DevOps. Anybody who hasn't broken their entire system by making a configuration management change hasn't been doing it long enough yet. You will. I remember the first time I did it. It was not much fun, but also it was better than the alternative, right? The risks that I accepted because of the automation, because of the leverage I could get from the automation were worthwhile. So automation is necessary. We have to have automation, but it's not enough. Automation can't respond to unpredictable events. And I loved that Adrian included a quote from How Complex Systems Fail at the end of his talk. He couldn't have set me up better because I have one of my own. This is a great paper, by the way, and it's very short. It's only 2 or 3 pages long, I believe, so it's completely worth reading. My favorite quote, and it's very self-serving because I believe in the whole human aspect of operations, but practitioners in first-line management actively adapt the system to maximize production and minimize accidents. These adaptations often occur in a moment-by-moment basis. I've done a lot of listening and reading and studying of these human safety aspects of various industries, right? There's a ton of interest in our ops world at understanding how the science and research that has been applied in other fields can be applied to ours. And Dr. Cook and others have spent a bunch of time studying this in various fields, and it's absolutely applicable to what we do. The The reality is that our systems are constantly in a state of failure, right? Partial failure all the time, especially at scale. At scale, everything fails. I was going to include that quote, but I think everybody kind of gets it at this point, right? The idea that any system of any scale is always going to be in a state of partial failure. There's going to be something that's not working as expected, basically all the time. And that's okay, because we can predict most of those types of failures. But our systems are increasingly complex, especially when we think about all the automation and microservices and service discovery mechanisms and platforms. The reality is every system we operate, no matter how simple we think it is a complex distributed system. And it's complex enough that we can't possibly understand all of the failure modes that exist. In fact, Dr. Cook points out here that not only can we not understand it, it's fundamentally unknowable. Complex systems fail in ways that are fundamentally unpredictable. And this is not going to change because it's really a fundamental fact of sort of nature, right? The interactions, there's so many interactions, the combinatorics involved are impossible for us to predict in advance. So if we have all this automation that solves sort of most of the predictable events, but complex systems fail in unpredictable ways, what's left? I guess humans. So the rest of the talk is going to be me thinking about some ways where we can focus more on the human aspect in various parts of our organization's processes, tools, and systems as a whole. And I'll start with processes. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch. My intent here is just to give you something to think about, give you maybe some directions to think down, and I would love to continue the conversation. So first, process. Don't make me think, right? When I get woken up at 3 a.m. to solve a problem, to the extent that's possible, be prescriptive. Tell me what I'm supposed to do as far as updating status sites go. Don't make me think about whether or not I should update it. That's not relevant. That's not a place where the human actually adds value in that situation. So think about when you're designing processes, when you're designing incident response workflows, when you're designing any process in your organization, think about the part of the process that the human is actually adding value to, and let them ignore the rest of it. Make those things prescriptive. And design your processes to be collaborative by default, because it's not safe to go alone. We want our teams to be working together. We want our people to be working together. We want our tools to support that kind of workflow. We want to design our processes so that when I wake up at 3 a.m. and I have a status incident, the first thing I do is ping the support team in their support channel in Slack and let them know there's a problem so they can update the status site, rather than me doing it myself, because I know that my focus needs to be on resolving the incident and somebody else can handle the communication. So be collaborative by default. Design collaboration into your systems everywhere. Build in some time limits, right? Let's say there's an incident that's been going on for more than 30 minutes and it's Sev2. Part of your process should be, I call for more help. I shouldn't have to think about that. That should be designed into the process. It should be easier to do the right thing than not. And be consistent in your process. When you have an incident response process, for example, don't ask me to use a different communication mechanism than the one I use every day. Don't make me think about changing tool sets because now I'm solving a different problem. The last time you want me to make decisions like that, the last time you want me to use unfamiliar tools is when I'm under stress. So make your processes consistent. Use the same workflow day to day that you use when you're solving problems. And when you're building processes and when you're designing processes, always do the simplest possible thing that could work. If you have a problem, think about what the simplest thing you can do is. A good example of this, when I was at DigitalOcean, we designed, we had this problem. I've had this problem everywhere I've worked, ever. And we've never solved it effectively. But we've solved it well enough. The problem is interrupt-driven workflow, right? Ops teams everywhere have this problem. You have project work to do, and you have requests from other teams, and you have unexpected events. And this tension between the unexpected and requests from other teams versus the project work that you need to move the platform forward, there's always this tension. So when you think about this, think about what's the simplest thing you could do. Well, the simplest thing you could do is assign somebody on a rotating basis to deal with all the interrupt-driven work so the rest of the team can largely ignore it. And we heard the same idea yesterday. I don't remember who said it, but it resonates true to me. This idea that start with the simplest thing that could work. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. It was simple. Who cares? adapt. And your processes should always be iterative. Just like our software is iterative, your processes should be open to change all the time. You should evaluate things that you've added to your environment, to your organization, look at whether or not they're working, be upfront about it, talk to your team about it, and make changes when it makes sense. So that's the process side. We're going to move on to tools. This is a shorter section. It's interesting, but it's very interesting since I'm a tool vendor. But so the first thing, ops tools don't have to be ugly. Get some help from a designer, right? It turns out your designers want to help you. They don't want to work on the corporate website all the time. And if you can convince a friendly product manager to give you a day of designer time, he can get a fun side project, or she can get a fun side project, and you can get a much better, much more useful ops tool that you don't hate to look at. And if you can't do that, at least use Bootstrap. Bootstrap is interesting, and the guy, Mark Otto, who built Bootstrap, worked at GitHub. It's funny, when Bootstrap came along, I think every ops tool on the planet immediately started using it. And the quality of the user interface for ops tools probably increased 10,000% overnight because we're really bad at design. So a little bit of design and a little bit of thought about the way that your tools look goes a really long way toward the mood of the people who are using them. And that's important. And embrace the Unix philosophy, right? It's really interesting to me how bad we are at designing tools, given the fact that we use command line interfaces all of the time, right? Engineers love shells. We love the Unix shell. We love pipelines. We love composing these crazy pipelines with sed and awk. We love piping commands and for loops and all the flexibility that it gives us. And then we design a gigantic shell script that does all of the things all by itself as a monolith. I don't understand why we do that. We should stop doing that. We should take the same ideas that make microservices a really interesting way to design architecture and apply it to the tools that we build. We should build the simplest tool that we can get away with. Instead of building a tool that knows how to delete EC2 instances that are tagged with a specific tag in a particular environment in a particular region, what if we built a tool that knows how to look up EC2 instances, and then we had a command that we could use to filter those, and another command that could delete them? Suddenly we have a tool we have three tools that are small, easy to understand, and that are much more flexible than the big thing that we used to have. This idea of small, sharp tools that do one thing that can be composed to do more complex tasks is fundamental to Unix. And we should be thinking about that when we're designing our own tools. The thing that I love about composition of tools is what it gives us in terms of adaptability, right? If you think about it, I've got these three tools now that can adapt to a bunch of different situations that I didn't anticipate. The amount of leverage, I think there's probably no tools in the world that I've used more than grep and awk in my career. And it's amazing the different uses I've had for them. The kinds of problems they've solved, from security issues or DDoS attacks or understanding how many people are using my site. There's a million things you can use those tools for. And maybe they're not perfect all the time, but they're adaptable, and I can use them for things that I didn't anticipate up front. And when designing tools, do the right thing by default. I gave another version of this talk at Monorama, and I had a slide that had this incredibly ugly help output from a Unix command. And I said, never ever do this. And the command was mega CLI. If anybody is familiar with this wonderful piece of software, I'm convinced that the UX design for it's a massive troll. It's this incredibly complex tool that has command line arguments that you can't possibly remember, and that you need to use in the most stressful time because it's what you use to manage your RAID controller and to resolve issues when drives fail. And the last thing I want to remember when I have a drive failure or I have a system that's got data corruption is what the enclosure formatting parameters are for finding the right drive that failed. Why can't I just have a command that's like rebuild the RAID with the hot spare? Like, do the right thing by default. Do the thing that you think I'm going to want to do. So when you're building your tools, think about what the use cases are. Think about what the common case is going to be. And don't build in a million options if you don't have to. Solve the common case. If there are other cases that you know are going to happen, maybe less frequently, but you know they're going to happen, fine, add some options. But do the obvious thing by default, and don't make me think about it. And consistency. Consistency matters a ton. Be consistent in the way that you design your interfaces for all of your tools, right? If you have tools that work with AWS and one of them takes --ID as a parameter and one takes --instance ID, and I don't know, one takes --ARN or one takes something else, it's very hard to remember the semantics for these tools. But if you're consistent in the naming of your options, for example, you get a lot of muscle memory and you get a lot of confidence for free. So you have these tools that you know how to use, even if you haven't used them frequently. Even if you've never used them, right? If it's 3 a.m. and there's a tool that performs a function that I need that I've never used, but it takes the same arguments as all of my other tools, I have a lot more confidence that I'm going to get the outcome that I expect. So be consistent and avoid gimmicky interaction mechanisms. The one here that I'm specifically thinking about, at Operable, we care a lot about chat ops, and we think it's the right way to collaborate. Human interfaces in ops tools are an abomination and should be shunned. Don't make me think about this crazy English dialect when I want to interact with a tool at 3 o'clock in the morning. Let me use a very prescriptive language. Let me use command line options that look like Unix. Let me be very specific about what I want. What I don't want is, I don't want the equivalent of Siri saying, okay, I'll delete all your instances in EC2, when I really just happened to be going through the drive-through and it heard, do you want fries with that? You know, I don't want to have to think about those kinds of things. I want the interactions to be consistent, and the gimmick of sort of fake English processing is not useful in that environment. I think it can be useful in plenty of other environments, so I don't think it's something that that is necessarily terrible everywhere, but I do think it's not appropriate for our needs. So how do these things work together for human scale operations? We talked about process, we've talked about tools. Let's sort of tie it all together at a more philosophical level in operations. So the first thing I think we need to do here to think about humans is to fight this hero culture idea. This is rampant in our industry. Depression and burnout and all sorts of disorders and sort of psychological issues are rampant in our field. And we can do things about it. We can push back, especially if we're in a leadership role. We can push back and we can tell people to slow down. We can make people take vacation. We can build processes that support the fact that you don't have to be a hero. We can make sure that we have adequate rest periods between on-call shifts. We can make sure that our processes dictate that if you've been on an incident for more than X period of time, then somebody else tags in and takes over. We can make sure that we keep an eye on the welfare of our people. Because at the end of the day, if the humans are the most important thing, the last thing we want them to do is burn out. And this is really, there's a concrete example of this that I heard at Monitorama that I loved. The hosted graphite company operates exactly what you would expect, a hosted graphite service. And they have week-long on-call shifts, and I think I'm telling this story right. They have week-long on-call shifts that go from Thursday to Thursday. And the interesting part is, if you've been on call, you automatically get Friday off. When your shift ends, you get Friday off. Because the presumption is that you've had some overnight calls maybe, or you've been stressed just generally by having to be on call, right? Even if you don't get paged, the mere fact of being on call, that you might be paged, is a stressor. And if you do the math and you think about what the sort of minimum viable on-call rotation is, it's something like 6 or 7 people as the minimum. And if you do the math about what that means, if you give 6 or 7 people, so you give 6 or 7 people 1 day off a week, every 6 weeks, it's almost insignificant. But it makes a big difference to the person that it affects. So from an organization point of view, it's insignificant. For the people that were on call, it makes a tremendous difference. And it's just one example of a company that's thinking about the well-being of their people, and that will likely have people that stay with them for a long time, that grow with the company, and that that have healthier lives, frankly. So next, make it safe to learn. The whole point of DevOps to me, and the collaborative ideas and this feedback loop, the reason I found DevOps compelling was the feedback loop, right? The idea that we're going to constantly learn from things that we do. We're going to build a safe environment to learn in. John Allspot talks about the idea of the blameless postmortem. Whether or not blameless is the right word, we could debate. But the idea that people should feel confident in sharing their point of view when performing a retrospective, right? When thinking about why something went wrong, you should be willing to say, oh yeah, I did this thing and that was probably a mistake in retrospect. It made sense to me at the time because of this, but thinking back, that was probably not the right thing to do. And you should feel safe admitting that kind of thing, because what you just did is save somebody else from making the same mistake. And this safe place to learn is critical for our ability to advance. And you should also learn from success, right? This idea of retrospective shouldn't just happen when you have a failure. You shouldn't only have a postmortem when things go bad. I had a manager at one point that I didn't hear from for months on end until we had a major outage, and then I would hear from him. And every time that happens, you get more and more angry and frustrated. So make it a habit to learn from success in the same way you learn from failure, because there's a lot of learning that can happen there as well. This one's sort of obvious. I'm not going to belabor it. Embrace iteration. Again, big design up front. It doesn't work for software. It's not going to work for our process either. We need to iterate. We need to take the things that we learn and feed them back into the rest of our organization. And we need to be very deliberate about it. This doesn't happen by accident. Just because we did a postmortem and we wrote a document doesn't mean that anybody's ever going to look at that ever again. And just because I had a near miss and I almost brought the system down and I sent an email to my internal mailing list, what about the person who starts tomorrow? They didn't get that email. So we need to be very deliberate about the ways that we think about sharing the knowledge that we generate in these hard-won ways, frankly. Right? Incidents are stressful, and the learning that comes out of it is incredibly valuable, and we need to think deliberately about how we disseminate that. We need to update runbooks. We need to update READMEs in projects that are affected. We need to update our process and procedure docs. Whatever we have, whatever mechanism we use to communicate, if it's a wiki, we need to update it. It's a bad example. Wikis are where content goes to die, but still, you get the idea. We need to be deliberate, and it needs to be part of the process, right? When you finish writing the document, when you finish the postmortem meeting, you're not done. You have remediation items on the technical side. What if you had a remediation item that was update the runbooks with things that we learned? What if you had a remediation item that was talk to every team that has a system that was involved about what you learned and work with them to make sure that gets documented so we learn from this in the future? I think that's a great place to start. And just like in process, I want to be consistent with the way that I work during an incident, being consistent with the way that I work day to day. And in my tools, I want consistent options. I want consistency here as well. I want to have a process. If I always perform a retrospective every week or after every deploy, I want to be consistent about that. If I always do a postmortem for Sev 2 and up, I want to always do a postmortem for Sev 2 and up. I don't want people to have to think about it. I want it to be a habit, not an unexpected event. And at the end, the whole point of this is that I think adaptable organizations win, and adaptable systems win. And that can be technical systems, that can be people systems, that can be these complex socio-technical systems we win. It can be organizations as a whole. But adaptability wins, and I think by thinking about the humans, which are the adaptable parts of our systems, more deliberately, we can build more adaptability into our systems as a whole. And Marco said I had to give a plug to our product, so here it is. We built this chatbot called Cog. It's pretty cool. It's got access control and auth, and you can check the links out there to learn more about it. And I think I think I have a minute or two for questions. Marco will let me know. But until he does, I'm going to take questions if anybody's got any. I'll also take comments and